This tutorial illustrates functionality that is available to someone configured with access to the contract management and billing functionality. The user will enter their email address and their password and click on the sign in button to access the system. The Billing Alerts tab appears. The system will automatically scan all of the contracts that are set up against projects and detect whether or not any items need billing. Let's take a closer look at setting up a contract. The first thing to mention is that you can have many contracts against a given project. So this could represent different phases in a project. However, you can only ever have one contract open at any point in time. As we can see from the screen, we break down the project into different contract lines. These would typically reflect the content of your proposal. Each contract line will have a purchase order, a contract value, and in this case we can see what we've invoiced against each contract line, what invoices are pending, and what is the balance remaining on each contract line. This screen automatically prompts us that there's time and expenses that require billing on this project for the previous month. It will also show you work in progress, giving you the flexibility to bill this time as well. So let's take a look at setting up a contract. The general screen shows me the project, the description, the client, the date, and the contracts manager. So two important things in this screen. The first is the status. When you create a contract, by default it has draft status, which means that you can do what you like and you can change the content of the contract. However, when you change the status to open, any changes made to the contract are written into the audit file. The next important thing about this screen is the contract manager. Different people may have responsibility for updating the contract in different organizations. In some cases it could be the project manager, it could be the account manager, but it also could be controlled by finance. We have some other defaults down here, for example the default day length and also the default purchase order number for this contract. We can set up billing rules. In this particular example, if we do more than 0 and less than 4 hours, we're going to bill half a day. If we do greater than 4 hours and less than 8, we're going to bill 1 day. It doesn't matter how much effort we do in a project on a given day. For each resource, we're going to cap the number of hours per day to 8. We can update the account information. We can attach supporting documentation like purchase orders. But let's look at the important part of a contract. Let's look at the individual contract lines. The contract lines typically mirror the lines in your proposal. In this case, we have a line for services and we also have a line for project expenses. Let's add a contract line to see the types of properties that we can allocate to a contract line. Typically we would type in a description. You would allocate it to a nominal code so that when we generate invoices from this system, the invoices can be taken straight into your finance system. We would specify the type of contract, fixed price, time and materials capped, time and materials unlimited, and so on. We would specify whether or not we want to track time or expenses against this contract line. We could also specify if a billing rule applies to this particular line. You can also specify the billing cycle. So you got monthly billing, where it will automatically detect any time or expenses incurred during that month. You've got event driven, which is like milestone billing, so it will prompt you to bill this contract line on the achievement of a milestone. You could enter in a specific date. This could be the anniversary of a maintenance contract. And you've also got ad hoc. This is where you may have a budget amount and you spend it as and when. You would allocate the purchase order, the start date, the end date, the number of units, and the price per unit. For ease of use, we also have these two flags. We can flag an individual contract line as being the default line for all effort on a project. Similarly, we can flag a contract line as being the default line for all expenses on a project. Let's look at how we would create an invoice. So this part of the screen tells me that there's timesheets and expenses that need to be invoiced. I click up here to create an invoice. The first thing I see is the general screen, which allows me to change the date, and it also allows me to select different projects, but it automatically picks up the default project. At this point, I can update the account information on an invoice by invoice basis. I can click on the invoice lines. This screen does look a little bit complicated, but let's break it down. The first thing it does is it's automatically filtering on all of the time and expenses up until the last day of the last month. It shows me the individual contract lines with the purchase order against those lines. This is to provide for if during the life cycle of a project you had to add additional purchase orders, then additional purchase orders would be associated with the contract line and they would appear underneath. Because this contract line here is flagged as being the default contract line for time, the system has automatically allocated all of the timesheets to that contract line. It's done the same with all of the expenses. So there's a couple of operations that you might wish to do. The first thing is by drilling into the timesheets, you might wish to write off time on a project. It's asking me here to hit the refresh button to reapply the professional day rules. These timesheets will always be associated with this invoice. The next thing I might want to do is to defer timesheets. Deferred timesheets will be picked up in a subsequent invoice. If you have large amounts of timesheets and expenses, you can use the filters at the top of the screen. You can follow a similar process for expenses, and as you can see, the amount of time allocated now to this invoice is 5,000, and that would leave £2,000 worth of time unallocated. So at any point in time, using this little section of the invoicing screen, I can see the entire status of the contract and this particular invoice. The bottom of the screen, it's automatically taken the contract line header and it's applied based on what I've selected here. It's applied all of this data and it's automatically created the invoice lines. I can add additional information to the invoice. For example, I could add a supplementary report to group all of the effort by date and resource, and I could also provide a breakdown of expenses using any of these categories. So to save the invoice, I simply press Save and Close. I can now see the original invoice that was authorized, but I've now got a new invoice here, which is pending authorization. You can set up different permissions in the application to permit people to authorize an invoice. If I view the invoices against the contract, I can see that this one here is authorized, this one here has not been authorized. I can print an invoice. A couple of things about this. First of all, because it's an unauthorized invoice, it's got a draft watermark across the invoice. The second thing is you can create your own layouts of the invoice. You can insert your own logos, and you can have more than one layout if you have different subsidiaries or different invoice formats. If you have access to authorize an invoice, you simply click on this icon and you press the authorize button. This provides a complete means of managing your contracts, generating your invoices, and providing an audit back to a timesheet and individual expense level. For more information on contract management and billing, please refer to the user guide. For information on entering timesheets or expenses, then please refer to the time and expense or team member tutorials and user guides.